every camera system, I guess, is unique in its functionality. You know, I mean, you got your Canon shooters and their cameras have a certain feel, and you got Nikon cameras, they have a certain feel. I've never had a desire to go outside of the 35 millimeter Nikon experience.
Same.
Never.
It's easy to use.
You know, I mean, back in the day when we were shooting film, back in the 60s and 70s, you know, a lot of guys were Leica, you know, Leica was the truth to them, you know, that was the camera, you know, or Hasselblad or Rolleiflex or, you know, Canons weren't that much of a thing back in the 70s and 60s. You know, back then Canon was making copiers. Why would I use a Canon? You know? But now they've come up on their game. I mean, Sony was making VCRs and televisions and stuff. They weren't making cameras. And now, you know, they're one of the top camera brands because their focus has shifted. So I guess right now, you know, it depends on what system you're familiar with, you feel good with. The difference is that people argue in terms of cameras and lenses. It's all bullshit. You know? A good lens can be gotten from Sony, can be gotten from Canon, can be gotten from Nikon, can be gotten from Leica, you know, can be gotten from Sigma. Yeah. The differences are minuscule, and most photographers can't even see them. Yeah. You know, photography nowadays has gotten to be more talk than technique. Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, if you say you go out and you start shooting birds, and you know, there's a lot of people that are out there shooting birds. So you get a bunch of photographers together and they stop shooting and they start talking about lenses and camera bodies and stuff. So are you going out to photograph, or are you going out to have a social situation? You know? Anymore with technology and stuff, the fundamentals of photography have been forgotten. There's a lot of people out there that don't know about selective focus. They don't know anything about hyperfocal distance. And they just push a button, let the camera make all the decisions, and call themselves photographers. That's problematic. I was at a school a couple of weeks ago talking to students, and they were talking about bokeh. And one of the students made a statement about had this assignment to create bokeh, and he was shooting at F-16. And I was taken aback. You don't get bokeh at F-16. You know? So what are people learning going to school for photography these days when they're not making their own prints? A great many of them aren't using a camera that makes them pick a shutter speed and an f-stop because they're using their phones. There's no such thing as pre-visualization anymore. It's more of a reactionary type of exercise. You see something and you don't consider what the final image is going to be. You don't have an image in your mind of the final image. I mean, shooting film back in the day, you couldn't press the shutter button and look at the back of the camera to see the image.
Well, if you open the back of the
You know, you couldn't do that. You know, and if you weren't processing and printing your own film, you had to send it away before you could see what you did. And that has never made any sense to me. It wasn't long after I took my first photograph that I started thinking about building a darkroom so I could process and print my own stuff.
Yeah, it's like waiting for that kind of stuff definitely.
Yeah. And when I was at the Art Institute in San Francisco, we were shooting 3, 4, 5 rolls of film a day, just walking the streets of San Francisco. Go back to the apartment, walk in the door, walk into the bathroom, pop the cassettes, load the reels, process the film. While the film was washing, you go into the kitchen and start dinner.
Did you do a lot of stand development? Are you a big fan of longer time development time?
It would depend on what I was doing. I shot a lot of rock and roll back in those days. I'd go to the jazz clubs and photograph, and the Fillmore and in San Francisco, and concerts all over the place. And if it was an evening deal, and I was probably be pushing film to like 3200 and processing an Accufine or a Rodinal or something like that.
I did that this weekend.
Yeah. And grain was never an issue, really. You could use grain creatively. I don't understand all of this hullabaloo about sharpening and all of this stuff that they're using today to get rid of grain or noise, as they call it now. It's a moot point as far as I'm concerned. It's a whole lot to do about nothing. I mean, half the stuff that these people shoot isn't going to get any bigger than a telephone image. Because they're going to throw it on Snapchat or Instagram or, they're not printing anything anymore. Nobody knows what a good print is. Where's photography going, man?
Right now, we don't know. But we'll figure it out. Someone's got to save it.
It's I feel sorry for people that are getting into photography right now because they're putting the cart before the horse. Let's go back to camera obscura, and I'm not saying make your own emulsions, and going into gelatin prints and all of that type of stuff. I'm not saying that.
Back to the basics, though.
But let's get back to the basics. That's what photo op is going to be all about. We're going to start with the basics. And I mean, I've got commercial photographers that are telling me that they can't wait till we have a darkroom and they can learn how to print. And these are commercial photographers. These guys are making 6 figures shooting.
It's like, imagine if we got those guys to get in here and do that kind of stuff.
Well, they'll be here. There'll be a lot of them here that have no idea of how to print. And once they learn how to print, they're going to become better photographers. The funny thing about photography is, and one of the reasons when I came out of the Navy, I decided to work in labs rather than be a shooter more so, was because it became a situation where it wasn't the quality of your work that got you the job. It was more of who you knew. So you had to be a part of a clique to get through the door. And even in the lab work that we did, there were a great many advertising agencies and art directors who realized the power that they had, and they would demand little kickbacks and payoffs just for you to get the account. When I recall when I was doing lab work, I'd go to advertising agencies and meet art directors and stuff, and sometimes I'd have to take them a little package or something from the owner of the lab, because that was the relationship that they had, you know. And it wasn't about one lab being that much better than the other lab, because all of the technicians, you know, you could work in a lab and have an argument with the owner of the place, walk out of that lab and walk into another lab, and you'd be working at that lab 4 or 5 hours after you quit the lab that you were previously working at.
Because it was consistent.
Yeah. And sometimes you would be hired because you worked on a campaign that was going from one lab to another lab. And maybe the lab that lost the account lost it for some stupid reason, but they're looking for a similar quality of work in the next lab that was going to be doing the account. So there were situations where I'd be working in one lab, and maybe I had been doing, say, DK New York, and that account goes to another lab, and I know the owner of the lab because it's a small community, and I get a telephone call, and they would hire me to come into the lab to continue to do that account, because I could satisfy the client with a similar quality that we were producing in the other lab. I worked in dye transfer and C prints and stuff in New York for about 24 years. And in that 24-year period, I worked at maybe 6 or 7 different labs. I was out with a good friend of mine, and we were taking some photographs. I'd already been in the Navy, and I was a photographer in the Navy. And he said, I got to go and pick up some prints. So we went into this one lab, and the lab smelled funny. And like I said, you know, I'd been a photographer in the Navy and worked in labs in the Navy, and I'd never smelled an odor like what was coming out of this lab. So the guy at the customer service desk, he let me go in the back so I could see what they were doing, and they were doing a process called dye transfer. And I had never heard of it before. Had graduated from Navy photo school, you know, a couple of years in the Navy as a photographer, never heard of dye transfer. So I filled out an application on the spot, and they hired me on the spot. This was in the summertime, in between semesters, because I was going to college. I was going to St. John's University. They'd given me a scholarship to run track. And I had an injury, and I was not competing at the time. And another scholarship bit the dust, you know, because I started working there and making money and learning the business and learning dye transfer. And I stayed at that lab for maybe 2 or 3 years. And then I went it was called Frenchie's Color Lab. Mm-hmm. And I left Frenchie's Color Lab. And, no, I'm sorry, it was Color by Pergament. Color by Pergament. And this guy, Frenchie, that I mentioned, had been a protege of the guy that owned Color by Pergament, Henry Pergament. And he had trained Frenchie. Frenchie's name was Octave Gisquet.
Octave Gisquet.
Octave Gisquet, yeah. And he had worked at Henry's for years. I mean, when he first came to the United States from France, Henry picked him up and trained him. And then they had a big fight, falling out, and Henry threw him out, and Frenchie opened his own lab. And I went to work at Color by Pergament initially, and Henry would have these art director luncheons on Thursdays, every Thursday afternoon. He had a little restaurant and part of the lab, and every Thursday afternoon, you know, there'd be New York strip steaks and baked potatoes and salads, and art directors coming in for lunch. And all the salespeople would invite their art directors over, and, you know, just food and drink, just to have a good time. And I stayed at Color by Pergament I think I was there for 5 years. And then I left there and I went to Berkey K&L. And Berkey K&L was a huge photography company. And I stayed there for about 4 years. And while I was there, we did a photo exhibition for Life magazine photographers. Jay Maisel and Ernst Haas and just a bunch of their photographers. And we won the Oscar at Photokina for excellence in dye transfer that year. I think it was 1972, 73, somewhere in there. And then I left K&L and I went to work. That's when I went to Frenchie after K&L. And I did color separations there and left there and went to Tartaro's. This was Frank Tartaro. He had a reputation for really a little different process in terms of the way he rolled his prints and some of the technical aspects of what we were doing. And then I left Tartaro's and I went to work at the Color Wheel. I left the Color Wheel and I went to work for Arnold Zoroff. Arnold Zoroff had also been one of the vice presidents at Berkey K&L when I was there. But he had opened his own lab in town. And I left Zoroff and went and worked at Man Green, and Stanley Mann and Art Green had worked at Pergament. Art Green had been a salesman at Pergament, and Stanley Mann ran the C department at Pergament. And then I left Man Green and went to work for another company. The name of the company now escapes me, but there were technicians that I had worked with at at Frenchie's. We got together and we decided that we'd open our own lab. And what happened was Eddie decided, I can't think of Eddie's last name, but he was the owner. He decided he was going to move the lab. I was working with Art and Stuart and Eddie. We all worked Arthur and I and Eddie worked in the dye transfer department, and Stuart ran the color department at this lab. And back then, you didn't get a lot of benefits at work. You didn't have insurance in a lot of places, but you were making good money. Back in this was in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, early 1980s. You were making about $25 an hour, and you would get time and a half for overtime, and you never worked a 40-hour week. You would work 50 or 60 hours. And the reason was because you were working for advertising agencies, and jobs would come in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that would be due at 9 o'clock the next day. So you'd end up working 15, 16 hours that day because you had to stay and do the overtime so it could get delivered in the morning. And so, you'd end up with 20 hours of overtime for a week at time and a half. And I was making good money, I was making six figures as a darkroom technician. So what we did was Eddie wanted to move the lab around the corner to we were on 39th Street in Manhattan between 5th and 6th Avenue. And he wanted to move around the corner and have the lab on 6th Avenue because there was more traffic, street traffic. And he was going to put the color lab and the dye lab down in the basement of the building that we were in. And the street level, he was going to have a 1-hour photo. So people on their way to work could bring in film and pick it up at lunchtime, And he wanted us to move the lab. He wanted us to physically move all the equipment and stuff. And we told him, no, we don't have any insurance. If we get hurt, give us some benefits and maybe we do this thing. He decided he wouldn't do it, So we got pissed off, and I had the idea that Eddie was so hard-headed that if we joined the union, he'd probably fire us, which would be illegal. And if we joined the union and he fired us, then the union would sue him, and we could probably get enough money to open our own lab. So that's what we did. But we didn't get quite enough money to open our own lab, so Stuart's father lent us some money, and we opened our own lab, called it Gamma Professional Photography. Gamma Professional Photo Labs was what it was called. And it was down on 24th Street between 6th and 7th Avenues. And we ran that lab for about a year and a half before we had to give it up because running the lab was very expensive. Not only did we have to buy the equipment that we needed, but once you got the equipment and the lab running, we had a couple of accounts that we had stolen from our previous employer, but you didn't get paid right away. You'd have to buy the paper, buy the chemistry, make the prints, and you might get paid in 60 days, 30 to 60 days. So you end up selling your invoices for half their value. And it's like going 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Because you got to do more work. You got to buy more chemistry. You got to buy more paper. You got to buy more film. And you're not getting paid for 30 to 60 days. And I had just gotten married when we opened the lab. Never get married and open a lab at the same time. Because it was a situation where I actually had to have a job to have a business. Because, when I got married, I had a stepson, so I had a family right away. And it was tough, we were living in an apartment up in Harlem, and wanted to buy a house, and it was tough. So actually I was working at Man Green while we were trying to get the lab off the ground, you know. And so we ultimately had to close it. And then I went back to work at Color Wheel. I had a friend and they'd want to take a tour in New York City and see what was going on and stuff. And they were always interested in the work that I was doing, you know, because the work that we were doing was stuff that you'd see it in magazines and billboards and stuff. And I would always take people to Grand Central Station to see the work that we were doing, because a lot of the work was in the light boards. We did a lot of Duratrans back then, and those were the prints that would be put in light boxes on the street, you know. And we would doing stuff, Marlboro ads and Victoria's Secret catalogs and Avon. Was it Avon? Yeah, Avon Cosmetics and Donna Karan, and then you were doing stuff for museums and galleries, and you're having all of these different photographers like Abaddon Turner, Pete Turner, Ernst Haas, Dwayne Michaels, all of these guys, Art Kane, all of these guys would be in and out of the labs because we were printing their work, you know, and none of these guys printed, but they had printers that did their work. Or if they went to a pro lab, they would come in and they would direct the print job, you know. Go in the darkroom, you make a print, run it through the processor, they look at it, need a little more red in there, can we make this blue a little bluer, can we add contrast here, can we open up the shadows, can we get more detail in the highlights, you know. And we would throw away prints that were like really good, but they weren't exactly what the photographer wanted, you know. And so I mean, I love that, you know. And I'd still go out and shoot my own stuff. I was still shooting a lot of rock and roll and stuff like that. Frenchie, one day I was in the lab and I had a slide sheet, you know, with a bunch of slides on it. And he came into the color separation room and I had my slides sitting on a light box. And he walks in, "Hey baby, what's this?" You know, and I think there was some shots I had gone to a Miles Davis concert or something like that. And I had some shots of Miles and, "Oh, these are pretty good, baby. Where'd you get these?" I said, "Oh, those are mine." He says, "Those are yours?" You know. And he says, "Hey, what are you doing here?"
That's the perfect way to put that.
You know, but I mean, you could shoot some really good stuff, man, but if you didn't know the people, you wasn't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very hard to get, that's a hard nut to crack, you know. So I just stayed in the labs and just shot for me. And I'm kind of happy about that, you know, because most commercial photographers, it's a job, you know. My relationship with photography is very passionate. And I love making a good print. I like shooting it, I like printing it, my stuff. And when I print other people's stuff, I ask them what they want. And I try to please them, like in the lab. You know, I can't impose my opinions and stuff on what the image is going to say, because it's not me making the statement. Even though I'm printing the job and making the statement, you know, I've got to make that print say what they want it to say, not what I think it should say. You know, and that's lost today, because photography was invented for paper, and you can get a specific color balance on a paper, and that color balance is going to define the story. The composition, the contrast, and color, that's what tells the story. But today, people want to look at images on their phone, their iPads, their computer screens. And you can line up an iPad, an iPhone, and a computer screen in a room. And unless they're calibrated, they're all going to be different. So, you know, what's the deal? And then you have people that you're shooting for these little screens, so an sRGB file is what you use, because that's compatible with the screens. But an sRG file is smaller than a JPEG. And if you shoot JPEG rather than shooting RAW, you're already throwing away thousands of colors. And the whole science behind digital photography is way beyond the understanding of the average photographer. But they don't want to get schooled in the basics of photography to understand the recipe that they need to use to get the maximum out of the equipment that they're using to get the best print that's possible. So you got people that'll go out and they'll shoot JPEGs, and then they'll ask me to make a print, and they're going to be really fussy about color, and they give me a JPEG, and they want a 24 by 36 print, and they give me a JPEG that's maybe 5 megabytes, and they want me to give them a color test. Yeah. They know nothing about bit depth and the different color profiles that are out there. And, you know, we've kind of taken the Empire State Building and turned it upside down and expecting it to stand up. And it's teetering as far as I'm concerned right now.
Do you think there'll be a change at all when it comes to photography in the next couple of years?
I have no idea, and I'm not really concerned about it. You know, I mean, I know what I like, and I'm not one that does a whole lot of social media, and you know, because it's really hard to separate the noise from the news in social media. And it seems like whoever makes the most noise gets the most attention. And there's not a lot of substance out there. The only thing that I can see that digital photography has done is make photography disposable. You know, I look at I can go out. I would shoot 5 rolls of film when I was going to school at the Art Institute. But I would come home, process that film, and I would make 5 proof sheets that night. And then I would look at the proof sheets that night, and I would circle images that I liked. And I would make work prints. Because after you go out and shoot black and white, and you're processing your own stuff, you get pretty consistent with the quality of the negative that you're producing. So I knew that I could, at F8, 5 seconds, 2 minutes, and the developer, Dectal, and, I'd get a decent print. So I could make the proof sheet, make work prints from what I shot that day, and I'd have all this done. I'd, come in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I start processing and stuff. By 10 o'clock, I was pushing, like 8.5, 11s on the wall. And I was buying my paper, like 500 sheets at a time.
What, 8 by 10?
8 by 10, 8.5, 11, Yeah. I'd use polycontrast filters, and then if I really like something, I might get a graded paper and use that. But yeah, I met you, 6, 7 years ago?
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think about me? Am I not that annoying anymore?
And and I've the thing that struck me was your love and your passion for photography, because I saw a lot of me in you. And I've watched you. You've asked me questions. I've given you answers. I've given you stuff to read, and you've read it. You're interested in learning photography and not just shooting. And there's a difference. You've had the experience of processing film and watching the image come up in the tray.
Shooting amazing rolls and fucking them up.
Yeah, filling up garbage cans.
Yep.
And learning how to print. It's going to sound crazy, but I haven't made a print in a long time.
Oh, well, we gotta make some prints.
And oh hell yeah.
We gotta make some fucking prints.
Oh hell yeah. And it's like riding a bicycle. You never forget. And I can still look at a print and tell a good print from a bad one. So I'm really excited about all of that. But as far as advice, nothing more than what I've told you all along is like shoot film, process it and print it, and it will inform you of your deficiencies. And if you stick with it, you'll get it. You'll find your sweet spot. And it doesn't necessarily have to be what I think is good, because it's yours. It's your eye. It's like Ansel Adams always said, like the negative is the sheet music. The print is the performance. Now, if the negative is the sheet music, it could be like that Beatles song that Ringo wrote, I Get High with a Little Help from My Friends. The Beatles did it, and Joe Cocker did it. Same song, 2 different interpretations. And that's what photography is. That's photography. There are photographers out there that became famous by breaking the rules of photography and putting stuff out that was technically deficient, but calling that deficiency art. And I think there's a space for that. It's not one that I would inhabit. It's not something that I like, but I can't poo-poo it, and you'd not catch me saying that it's a great print when it's bullshit. And the whole idea of that print being there was for it to be bullshit. And that's the only meaning it has. It's an artist's statement. And this probably won't be very well received, but it's like reality TV. That's what it is.
Yeah, never liked it.
It's like reality TV, you know? It's like somebody just saying here this is bullshit. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else coming over and saying, wow, that's great. It's like when I was at the Art Institute, we're in the darkroom making prints. Guy comes in the darkroom, says to another guy, he's just put his print in the developer. He says, come on, man, we're gonna light one up out here. We're gonna smoke a doobie. Come on out. He says, hold on a minute, let me get it in the fixer. Goes, puts his film print in the fixer, then he walks out. Smokes a joint, is out there for about 10, 15 minutes. His print's in the fixer. Well, he comes back, he takes his print out of the fixer and he looks at it. Wow, man, this is cool. Look at that. Look at what, man? You bleached your print. You bleached your print. Oh, but this is so cool, man. And now he's got something that's different. And that difference is better than what it was supposed to be. Why?
Because he smoked a doobie.
Yeah. Not because that the bleaching of that print was supposed to add something to that statement that the print was supposed to make. You know, and look, there are times when you're walking down the street, you're carrying your camera and something happens and you get caught up in the moment and you just start firing off images because you've got to record what you've just witnessed. You go into the dark room, process your film, make your print, and wow, I overexposed it. Wow, I underexposed it. I got to do a lot of burning and dodging. And yeah, you can get closer to what that normal print would be, but with all the burning and dodging, it's never going to be the same as a properly exposed image, negative. Okay, you're going to have some challenges making that print. Now, you can do masking where you can put more detail into the shadows or highlights. You know, you can mask for highlights, you can mask for midtones, you can mask for shadows. You can mask for color. You know? And that's a lot of that is what's going on in Photoshop when you're working with layers. So, you know, understanding what you're doing has a lot to do with you reaching the desired result rather than not knowing what the hell you're doing and being surprised by the result and accepting it. The unfortunate thing about photography today is that people get confused with that. And if you're going out to photograph something, I don't care what it is. If I'm going out to photograph eagles, in my mind, I have images that I want to take. And I have to be patient in that regard because I don't have any control over what the eagle does.
You just control it.
Yeah. But if I go into a studio, I control everything. And if you're in a studio shooting, there should be no problem making your prints. But I'll never forget when I first came out here, I was walking around and I was carrying my little D7000 and it was on this shoulder and I had a Sekonic meter on this shoulder. And I came upon a commercial photographer who was setting up a shoot. And we got into a little bit of a conversation, and he looked at my light meter and he says, "Oh, I never use those." And I said, "Okay. There's meters in your camera and stuff like that. I get it, you know." And then a few years later, I had an opportunity to print some of his work. He came to me, gave me the job, and he had shot a number of portraits. Not all at the same time, not all at the same place, but that shouldn't matter. All with a similar concept, similar background, similar lighting plot. And when he gave me the job, this is going to be a piece of cake, you know. His lights, his setup. You go and set it up the same way every time. You light it the same way every time. You meter it so that the exposures are the same every time. So each print should print the same way. He never used the light meter.
Was it a piece of cake?
No. No. See, now the task of making all of these prints the same
Became more of a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Each print needed a little tweaking here, a little tweaking there, a little dodging here, a little burning there. Because he was inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you usually try to shoot a roll an average, and then you do more of your messing around with the development.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes total sense now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
So, shooting and printing should go together. If you're a photographer, you should be printing your own stuff. Now, it's unreasonable for a lot of photographers to print their own stuff, but most of these photographers have a printer who does nothing but print. And they know exactly what the photographer wants. They work together to get that result. And that's fine. But today, people have no fucking clue. They don't even know the difference between papers. You know, you've got textured papers. You've got papers that are made specifically for black and white, but have the ability to do a kick-ass color print too, on all different kinds of surfaces. But you got papers that have optical brighteners in them. You got papers that are made with a different chemical background to give you blacker blacks, you know. And most of these papers that don't have optical brighteners in them don't give you a pure white. It's more of it has a little tone in it, you know. But most people don't see it. You know, one of the funny things was when I walked into that dye lab the first time, because of the smell that I experienced. After I started working there was a Chinese technician in there. His name was Toy Ing. And Toy, he was working on a print, and he was showing me a color that I couldn't see. It was magenta. It was a very subtle magenta, but I couldn't see it. But after I worked in that lab for a while, I could see it.
And color printing has to be a whole other fucking level. That's probably why I was shooting like that. They're like, oh, you're a great black and white photographer. I'm like, yeah, because it's easy.
Well, color's challenging. Color is challenging because there's a whole plethora of stuff. It's like I never forget when I opened my studio at the Draw. One of the first things I did was I took the incandescent lights out of the overhead and I put in daylight bulbs. And I'll never forget, John walked in there one day, ooh, the light, ooh, it's so bad, ooh. Yeah. And I said, okay. But the light, the color of the light that you view your prints in is very important. Because if you're color correcting and you've got 3,200 Kelvin lights, which is warm, and then you take it to somebody and they're looking at it and they're using fluorescence, which is like 5,700, it's gonna look different. It's gonna look different. If you run outside and you look at your print and you make a color correction, you make the print and you come back out, and now there's a cloud over the sun and you look at the print. You gotta be consistent with everything. And people don't want to be consistent today. People want to be consistently inconsistent. Me. You know? And you can't be consistently inconsistent and be a good photographer. You might think you are, and you might call yourself a good photographer, but you're not. You know? And it's a harsh truth, you know, because people want to be recognized. They want to be liked. They want their work to be liked. That's what it's all about now. How many likes did I get? Fuck a like, man.
This is true.
You know? Because we all hunger for this recognition and stuff, and fame is highly overrated. It's highly overrated. It's when I was running track, you know, we'd set goals. Okay, I want to run a half mile under 2 minutes. That was when I was a freshman. That's what I wanted to do in high school. I wanted to run a half mile under 2 minutes. I didn't do it. I got it down to like 2:02. Yeah. But as soon as I was a sophomore, I ran 1:58. And then, you know, I started setting these goals. And the funny thing was that we all think that if we can get this camera, we're going to be the best photographer. If I can achieve this goal, it's gonna change my life in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Well, yeah, it's gonna change your life, because as soon as you set that goal, you set another one. You know, because that's old news. That's all, you can't. And success is never final, and failure is never fatal. You know, when you reach a goal, you immediately set another one. Because if you don't, you become complacent. You become satisfied. And then you wither and die. And everybody wants to achieve this one goal that's supposed to make their life better. No. It's not the goal that's going to make your life better. It's what's between here and here that's going to make your life better, and how you process stuff. And finding that non-material thing that makes you happy. Because that nirvana that we're all seeking, I don't think it exists. It's like a carrot that's just, yeah, and it's just out of your reach. And in one sense, it's good, because I think human beings always need to be striving for something. Being complacent and just satisfied is, we're always worrying about what other people think and how we're perceived, and just so much bullshit. Yeah, but no, my joy right now is my goals in life right now have very little to do with me, because I'm satisfied with my life. And the best parts of my life are still ahead of me. I mean, I've had a fantastic life. I've had a life that I never dreamt of. Well, actually I did, because my wife one time was putting me down, calling me a dreamer. And in reality, she was giving me a great compliment. Because those dreams have fueled my life. And many of those dreams that I've had have come true. There were never dreams of like material stuff. It was just things that I wanted to do, places I wanted to go, things that I wanted to see, things that I wanted to create. This place. When I was in high school, a friend of mine said to me, he said, "Wow, man, did you hear about this guy, Julio Meade? He went out for the track team today and he ran 11.5 for 100, a freshman." I said, yeah, okay. "What do you mean, yeah, okay? You couldn't make the team." "Yeah, I could." So I went out and I made the team. Graduated number 1 in the country in my event. And when I started running, I read everything I could about track and field. If there was a track meet in California that made the magazines, I cut the article out and put it on my wall. The walls of my bedroom were like a scrapbook, nothing but newspaper clippings and magazine covers and Adidas posters from the Olympics, all on the walls in my bedroom when I was a kid, when I started running. And from the time I was a freshman to the time I was a senior, the only difference was when I was a senior, all of the clippings on the wall were mine. All of the articles on the walls had been written about me. It was my first lesson in pre-visualization. Visualize what you want. Acting like you're already there, and it becomes real. The second time it happened, I was standing behind a light board in Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. And I was lighting director for a rock and roll band that was opening up for ZZ Top. And I had this tremendous feeling of deja vu, like I've been here before. And I had, because I had imagined it. And I started actualizing the visualization that I had until it became real. This place is the third. So, the visualization part, the visual part, I've always been a visual person. That's why I'm a photographer. Dreamer. You know? And, you know, along the way, there were always people that were telling me I was wasting my time, it would never happen, you can't do it, you're gonna fail, do something else with your life. No. I've touched a lot of people in my life, all over the place. And I'm not done yet. No, I'm not done. And it's never really been about me. I've always been a team guy. I've always had a team. And you can't do it all by yourself. But I can sell people on my dream. Make my dream their dream. And then together we can make this thing happen.